Today, we are talking about picking yourself back up after tragedy strikes so that you can love again.
I'm Cameron. I spent years building my career and creating a life I loved. And when my Prince Charming finally showed up, he had 4 kids in tow. Fast forward through lots of mistakes made and lessons learned, stepfamily life was much more complicated than I realized. If you're looking for help with blended family life, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Stepmom Diaries, where we keep it real as we dish about all the things. This is your weekly dose of blended family inspiration and encouragement. You're not the wicked stepmother, so let me help you find your fairy tale ending. Come on, let's do this.
Welcome, welcome. Today's guest is Krista St-Germain, and this is a discussion unlike any other I've had on the podcast before, because we're talking about grief. And we're not talking about grieving expectations, things that we have talked about in this space. We're talking about real, actual, like the love of your life has passed away grief and how you can come back from that. And I have to tell you, the discussion is one that I could have had for another hour or two because I had so many questions, and it is just really inspiring to talk to someone who has gone through what Krista has gone through and come back and is now helping other people. So I think you're going to enjoy this discussion. I think you're going to enjoy hearing from Krista. So let's get into who she is. So Krista St-Germain is a master certified life coach, post-traumatic growth and grief expert, widow, mom, and host of the Widowed Mom podcast. And she is also a stepmom. When her husband was killed by a drunk driver in 2016, Krista's life was completely and unexpectedly flipped upside down. After therapy helped her uncurl from the fetal position, she discovered life coaching, post-traumatic growth, and learned the tools she needed to move forward and create a future she could actually get excited about. Now she coaches and teaches other widows so they can love life again too. Krista has been featured online and in print in Psychology Today, Medium, Thrive Global, Bustle, Psych Central, and Parents Magazine, and on select podcasts such as the Self-Work Podcast, Seek the Joy, Life Check Yourself, and You Need a Budget, just to name a few. So let's dive in with Krista. Welcome. It's so nice to have you.
Thank you for inviting me. Always a pleasure to talk about grief. Anytime anybody wants to talk about grief, I'm down.
And for those of you listening, she's saying that with a smile on her face.
Yes, totally.
Pleasure to talk about grief. We have so much to talk about, and your background is so interesting. But let's start with, I always like to ask my guests for their origin story before we, dive into any of the topics. So you obviously have a really complex stepfamily story. So tell us your origin story. You're a stepmom now for the second time.
Yeah.
But so tell us all the things.
Okay. So I was born. No, I was married and had 2 children, and we divorced when my children were, I don't even remember. Was it 2014? Something like that. And then, in 2016, I got remarried, and the person who I married, Hugo, was the sort of father to, what he would call his son, Lance. He never actually adopted Lance officially, but when Lance's mom was pregnant with him, the biological father left her, stole all her belongings, and he was quite the piece of work. And so Hugo was really the only dad that Lance ever knew. So I became a step parent to Lance through marrying Hugo. And then shortly after we got married, we were coming back from a trip, and we had driven separately, and I had a flat tire, and I pulled over on the side of the interstate, and he, being the stubborn man that he was, wanted to change the tire on the car instead of calling AAA. And as he was trying to do that, he was trying to get in the trunk of my car to get the spare tire. A driver who we later found out had meth and alcohol in his system. Daylight, hazard lights on, just didn't see us, and crashed into the back of Hugo's car and trapped him in between his car and my car. And life was completely upended. So I have definitely stepmom stories from the aftermath of that as well. But then that's what led me to really quickly realizing I didn't have the tools that I needed for grief. And ultimately, when I got a bit further down the road and had figured it out kind of the hard way, I decided to become a grief coach. And I specifically work with widowed moms. And I gave myself several years to kind of do what I consider the inner work of like figuring out how do I get myself to a place where I feel really emotionally stable, where it doesn't feel like a need for me to be in a relationship again. And once I did that, I then decided, okay, it's time to date again. And that was in 2020, right before COVID happened. So I started dating, met someone, literally strange story, but the first person I actually went out with, we just clicked really well. And then COVID happened and we kind of went into our little COVID bubble, and he had 2 kids. I had 2 kids, and we just kind of never left each other. So his oldest has recently married. He's a junior in college, and his youngest just graduated from high school. So I technically don't wear the official name of stepmom because we aren't married, but we have lived together for the last few years now. So,
well, I will correct the record on that and say that you don't have to be married to be a stepmom.
Okay,
so
well, thanks.
You are.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Feel like it.
Yes. So, okay, let's talk about grief. So first of all, the accident. I mean, oh my God. I mean,
yeah.
Like I cannot even imagine. And I'm sure you get this reaction all the time when you tell the story, but I can't imagine picking yourself up after something like that happens. I mean, what a horrendous experience, tragedy, the fact that you were there together. I mean, just all of the aspects of it are just truly awful. So what was your process of picking yourself back up after that?
Yeah. Fortunately, I had a great therapist. From when I had gone through my divorce, I had seen her for a number of years kind of leading up to my divorce. And so I already had that really solid relationship. My cousin actually had the same therapist, and she immediately texted my therapist to say, Krista's going to need an appointment, because I hadn't seen her in a while. So what was really helpful for me in the beginning was going to be in an environment with her where I felt like I could just talk openly, and I wasn't worried about what other people would think about what I was saying. I didn't feel like I was being a burden to her. I could just talk about it, because there's that dissonance where you intellectually understand that it has happened, but it hasn't sunk in yet, right? It's not embodied. And so talking about it until it actually felt real was valuable to me. I had a really supportive family. My parents were just amazing. My friends were amazing. My coworkers, Hugo and I had worked together at the same company. So all the people who knew and loved me at work, most of them had known him for, longer than they had known me. I was there for 10 years. He was there for 20. And so I had a really supportive environment at home and at work and friends. I spent a lot of time outside, just grounding myself, like being in nature and keeping my feet on the ground, which, when it feels like you just kind of don't know what happened in your world, there's something comforting about being in nature and literally having my feet on the ground. There really is. Yeah. I did a lot of journaling. I tried to read. I'm a pretty big reader, but the widow fog was intense. That was a little frustrating, because you want to read, if you want to read and you can't read and retain, that can be frustrating. So I couldn't really turn to that as much as I wished I could have, but yeah, it was intense there for a while.
So how did you get into becoming a grief coach? Mm-hmm. Because I know people have different motivations for coaching. And, I became a step family coach because I learned so much through trial and error, and there weren't enough resources out there. Was it a similar sort of journey? Like you made it through and you're like, people really need help with this? Like, how did you, you know what I mean? Like, that's a big decision.
Yeah, very much so. I think, I hadn't really thought much about grief until Hugo died, to be honest. And what I thought I knew was actually not current information. It was, I really only knew the 5 stages of grief. That's what I had heard. And so So I pretty quickly found that the information I had wasn't really helping me, and the advice I was getting from other people wasn't really helping me. A lot of the platitudes and the time heals and the stay busies and the they're in a better place and, that kind of stuff. And I didn't really intend to be a grief coach. It was just that I got to a point in therapy where I felt like I wasn't making the kind of progress that I wanted to make. I call it a plateau when I look back on it now, where you're back to functioning. You're not fetal anymore. People are looking at you and they're telling you how strong you are and how great you're doing and how impressed they are and how they could never, but on the inside, you're not feeling that way.
Right.
You're feeling like I was just like, okay, well, I guess this is what they call the new normal. And I guess I'm just going to kind of live for the kids and, I'll be okay, but I'll probably never be happy again because, that's gone. And it just kind of oddly happened that when I was in that moment, I happened to discover a life coaching program. It wasn't even grief specific, but I happened to enroll in it. I chose to. And I was simultaneously pursuing 2 tracks. One was that I was going to go back and get my marriage and family therapy degree because my therapist was like, you should be a therapist. You can come and work for me. She had the plan, right? And just like a lot of times when something big happens, you look back and you reevaluate, are you doing what you want to be doing? And that's what I was going through at the same time, right? It's like, okay, if life is this short, do I want to work in aerospace? No, I don't really. I don't really care. Hugo loved planes. He was fascinated by them. It was something he really was meant to do. I didn't care. It was just something that paid the bills. So I was pursuing this MFT program and enrolled in this life coaching program. And in parallel, started realizing that one was really tripping my trigger more than the other, And so I decided, I don't really want to be a therapist. I think I just want to be a life coach. Went the life coach route, still never intending to be a grief coach at that point because it was just too fresh. And I imagined it would be sad all the time and that I didn't want that. But then ultimately came to the conclusion, once I had done enough more of my own work where nothing else made sense, but to work with widows. So that's how I ended up there. So then I quit my job and never looked back.
So this is maybe a weird question, but, is it sad? You said you were worried it would be sad to work with. And I think probably a lot of people listening are like, yeah, that sounds like it would be really hard,
I think what changed is my relationship with sadness changed. So I think before I was viewing sadness as something you want to get away from or something that's problematic. It's kind of like, have you ever seen Pixar's Inside Out?
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like the progression that the character Joy goes through with sadness, where she's like trying to put sadness in a box and keep sadness contained and don't let sadness touch the core memories. And right, like sadness is a problem. And then at the end, she realizes that no, sadness actually adds so much value. And it's like a key part of Riley's life. And without knowing exactly that's what was happening. That's really what was happening is I was realizing, oh no, it's not about being happy all the time and being grateful and trying to find the bright side. It's actually about being human and being fully present with what is. And sometimes what is sadness, but that's okay. So it's not that it isn't sad. It's that I changed the way that I experience sadness.
Yeah. That's so important. Well, so you mentioned the 5 stages of grief, and I know that you talk about them as being a myth. So tell me about that, because I think that that's such an old, you've got to go through the denial and the da-da-da.
Yeah, I mean, myth probably isn't the most accurate word. The 5 stages of grief was created in 1969. Most people, I don't think, realize that it is as old as it is. And initially, it was an anecdotal study, very important in its time, right? Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was studying hospice patients. She was noticing people who were terminally ill, who were trying to come to terms with the diagnosis, would tend to deny and then get angry and then go through a phase of bargaining and then get depressed, and ultimately they would accept their diagnosis. And so that's where the 5 stages came from. So first she wrote on death and dying, and then she took those anecdotal things that she was noticing really and applied them to grief, and then wrote a book called On Grief and Grieving. And she was never really trying to say that this is the way it has to be, should be, always is, must look like, right? She was not trying to give a linear, formulaic, boxed in definition of what it looks like to be, a human experiencing grief. But my issue with it is that's how we took it, right? That's what we made it into. And she was just trying to say, hey, this is what sometimes people experience. And we went, hey, this is how you should experience it. And if you're not experiencing it in this way, then you're not doing it right. Like, have you been angry enough, right? Mm-hmm. Did you reach the place of acceptance? Acceptance isn't like a place that we reach, right? I believe if we kind of zoom out, the definition that resonates the most with me about grief is that it's the natural human response to a perceived loss. Okay. So the loss happens. We're humans. We have a response to it. That response might change over time, but the loss doesn't. The loss doesn't change. We can't undo time. We can't go back and change it. So we're always going to have a response, which means grief will always be there. It's not something we move past or get over, right? Or reach the end of. It's something we learn to integrate. And so what I thought the goal was like, get through it, get the A+, do it as quickly as possible, return to productivity, because that's surely where your value comes from, right? Like, and also find the silver lining. And I didn't really realize how gaslighty that was, how much toxic positivity, was in there, how much, just how little room for humanness there was, right? Versus the approach of, can we just learn to think about our experience in a way that feels intentional, right? Mm-hmm. Instead of just being kind of victim to our first reaction around it. Can we integrate it into our lives? Can we decide who we want to be given that the loss has happened? And the 5 stages of grief just doesn't really allow for that. And of course, nobody's really talking about all the other grief theories that have come since then. It's, it's a field just like any other. There are lots of different opinions on what grief can look like, but people are just talking about the 5 stages. And I wish we would just stop that.
I love that approach of really incorporating it, because it doesn't go away. Whatever you're grieving, whether it's death or, the death of a relationship or, whatever that looks like, it doesn't go away.
Yeah. But when you've been telling yourself that it should, and then it doesn't, then what I tend to notice is that we make it an us problem instead of a misunderstanding of grief problem. Yeah.
So let's talk about grief and step-parenting. So how did all of that, first of all, how did it play out with your stepson after Hugo was killed? And how did that impact your kind of your current relationships with your stepkids, and how has all of that come about? Because I can only imagine navigating that was an added complication, challenge, all of the things.
It really was a trip. Hugo and I had only been married for a few months, and one of the things that we didn't realize you could do was change your beneficiaries on your insurance policy. He hadn't actually done that. We thought that you had this open enrollment period at work, right? And that we were coming up on it. And then when the open enrollment period came, we would change it. So his first wife was still his beneficiary on his insurance policy. And she and I had never met. Well, that's not true. I think we'd seen each other socially, but we'd never really had a conversation. We didn't have any sort of relationship. And literally the first meaningful interaction was in the hospital, when he was in intensive care and actively dying.
Oh, wow.
So yeah. And Lance was there for all of that, and he had to watch all of that. And that was, that was just, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. But it was a bit to navigate. Hugo didn't have a will. I didn't really know. I knew what his intentions were from conversations, but there was nothing written down. So, his first wife and I sat down later and went through the finances. She was a gem. She was like, this is not my money. This is your money. This is, he wouldn't have wanted me to have this. And so, but we worked together on figuring out a plan for what was best for Lance financially. And we picked someone that wasn't us to be the person in charge of that money and helping Lance with it. We wanted a male figure. So we asked one of Hugo's friends to do it. And yeah, it was just a real strange place to be in, because I mean, yes, we were married, and also I had not been in his life for very long. And here I was coming in, right? It was just, it was odd, but yeah, Angie is a good human. And it's funny. Also, what I learned about that is I had never heard her side of the story. I'd only heard his, because that's the way that it is when you're in a relationship with someone.
Yeah.
You just hear their story about their ex.
Yeah.
And so different to then actually get to know her and to have that issue bring us together and to then see her side of him and the world.
Wow.
So, yeah. And shortly thereafter, she was so gracious. She referred to me as mom number 2, right? Like that's how she would introduce me to people when Lance was around. This is Lance's second mom. And, he ended up finishing his last year in school. He did kind of an alternative program, which I know Hugo would never have loved, but it was great for him. And then after he did that, he joined the Marines and, went away. And I got to go to his graduation. She and I both went to California for his graduation. And so, yeah, he's still part of my family. He's married now and years have passed, but it was an interesting ride.
Wow, that's amazing that you and his first wife were able to kind of come together. And I have to tell you, that is something that I think, from working with stepfamilies, that's something that is not uncommon, that, you get married and it takes a while to change the beneficiaries and do all the things. And it's not the first thing you think about. And it's so important, right? I mean, I don't know. Yeah. It's such a hard thing to talk about with your new spouse, but wow.
Yeah, it was just kind of an oversight. I mean, we just thought, oh, that's something that we do once a year when insurance rolls around, and never really thought about it. But
because of course you wouldn't think that this major thing would happen, right? I mean, who anticipates that?
Yeah, nobody ever thinks about, the dying part. Surely that's not going to happen until we're, I don't know.
Yeah.
Not in this decade. But yeah, it was. And also I think I had such a great example growing up of, being in a divorced family that was remarried. And I watched my parents work really hard to get along and to put their differences aside for the benefit of myself and my stepbrother. So I knew it could be done, right? Even when I got divorced, that's what, my ex-husband and I talked about was like, can we be super friends? Can we we're not meant to be married, but can we parent well together and show up for each other? Mm-hmm. And that's how I see my parents acting to this day. Like they're more like siblings, they're not married anymore, but they very much love each other and care for each other and show up for each other.
That's amazing. That's unusual.
Mm-hmm. No, I know. And I will credit my stepmom with that actually, because she grew up in such an awful setting with her mother and her father getting divorced. And it was so ugly that she basically told. So let me just tell you this real quick. So my mom and my dad were married, high school sweethearts, had me straight, like out of college, got married, had me very young. My mom, her best friend since middle school is now my stepmom. She got married to this man named Joe, and he joined the Navy. They got married. They had my brother. My parents got divorced a few years later. She and Joe got divorced a few years later. And then a couple years after that, she married my dad. Well, no, my mom married Joe, and then she married my dad. So my step-parents were both married to each other at one point. I know. I love your face. I told you. It was like little Jerry Springer. And so my stepbrother is like, he's my stepbrother, but my parents are his stepparents and his stepparents are my parents. So we spent, since I was 5, I really don't remember much before this, 5 or 6, we would spend 1 week at one house and then we would switch and we would go to the other house.
Wow.
And they always,
that is amazing.
Mm-hmm. And my stepmom was like, listen, I know we hate each other. And this will not affect our children. Like we will pull it together for them. We will work together. And you wouldn't know it now because they actually all really do get along well now. But I know there was so much animosity in the early part of their co-parenting experience. But they made it happen. Every Sunday night, they sat down and they reviewed what happened that week. And they made decisions together and they dealt with the finances together. And they did that our entire lives. So I knew it could be done because I had seen it.
Yeah. What an amazing example that you had. That's phenomenal.
Yeah. And for me, looking back on it, I felt like a lucky kid because
yeah, of course.
Christmases, like you spent 1 week, and then about the time when that family was getting tired, you could go to the other family who was fully refreshed. I never had to go to the grocery store. Like they didn't make me run errands, like, double the grandparents, like all the things.
So how do you, shifting, so you had that great experience and you've now been a stepmom, a mom, and like, how do you talk to kids about grief? Because, we in the step family coaching world, we talk a lot about, how your spouse's ex, is sort of always omnipresent, but we don't talk a lot about when the spouse's ex has passed away and the grief and that they're still omnipresent there, but in a very different and complicated way. Mm-hmm. So how do you talk to kids about all that and about, their grief for their parent or their step parent,
Yeah. There's no one size fits all, of course, but what I notice, people tend to shy away from sometimes is they're so worried. Like we're so conditioned to believe that feelings are problems that we tend to not bring up people who have died, right? Or avoid.
Yeah. We kind of tuck them away.
Yeah. Like, let's just not talk about it. They look like they're doing so good and I don't want to upset them. And it comes from this well-meaning place, right? But when you've lost a parent, you don't want to not talk about them for the most part. Right? You want their memory to be brought up. You want stories to be shared. You want to figure out a way to not feel like it's just a you thing, right? Like let it be normalized within the family. And so I think we want to give people opportunities to have photos out and tell stories and incorporate, that parent in holidays or whatever feels good to them. And it's of course going to be different for every kid. What feels right to one kid is going to feel completely different to another kid, and let them have their preferences, but don't hold back because you're afraid that they will have some feelings. They're already having feelings.
Yes, they are. And they don't know how to express them. We talk a lot about that in the step family space, and I'm sure you do too, that their little brains aren't developed and mm-hmm. there are lots of emotions that they don't even know they're having and they're acting out on, not even realizing what they're actually upset about,
Yeah. Yeah. And if we can do worry less about how they're feeling and worry more, I don't really want us to worry, but focus more on being present with ourselves and learning how to, keep ourselves regulated and deal with our own emotional responses to things, right? Then we're setting an example, and it may be sometimes explicit and sometimes more implicit, but is creating a culture in the family that makes it easier for everybody to deal with their emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a way that's healthy. I think it can be really hard for the step parent, that you have the first spouse or the previous spouse who is sort of always there and on a pedestal. And, how does step parent deal with all of that? Because it's one thing when you're dealing with an ex-spouse who's very real and in the other house, right? Mm-hmm. And it's a little bit of another when you're dealing with the kind of idealized memories that are around. And, you may feel like you never will measure up, or maybe there are relatives that, I don't know. It's just I'm not articulating that really well, but that's a tough thing for step parents, right?
Yeah. And I think we got to bring ourselves back to it totally makes sense if that's the experience you're having, right? It's not a you problem. And also simultaneously, it's really not about you, right? Their relationship with their other parent is not a reflection of you. It doesn't mean anything about you. You don't have to worry so much about it, right? Focus on your relationship with them, because that's what you can actually influence and change.
I love that. Pull yourself out of the equation,
Yeah.
Make it less about you.
Yeah.
Because you're right. It's not.
Yeah.
It is a weird position to be in, but it is not about you.
Yeah. And you can create so much space for that other parent to be there, right? Even though they're not there, you can create the space for them to be there. I think the problem is when we start comparing ourselves to them, or, because we do have a tendency to idealize people who have died, right? Well, that's
Absolutely.
not a fair comparison.
Yeah.
It really doesn't have anything to do with you anyway. You're your own unique, amazing person, and they were their own unique, amazing person. And you just come back to our own lane.
Yeah. But I think you're right. I mean, if you can kind of help the kids, keep that memory around and alive, it'll strengthen your bond with the kids.
Yeah.
And they'll appreciate you in the long term.
Yeah.
For, honoring that relationship.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, again, we can't control that either, but definitely more likely to. Yeah.
Yeah, I would think so. Oh my gosh, I feel like we could talk about this forever because there's so much that, I'm curious about, and I think my listeners are probably curious about as well. Krista, tell me where folks can find you. And I know you've got a free course that you're offering our listeners on navigating grief. So tell me, I'll link to it in the show notes. Tell me a little bit about all of that.
So I am also a podcaster. I host a podcast called The Widowed Mom Podcast, which I realize for a lot of your listeners, sounds a little too specific, but anybody who wants to learn more about grief or post-traumatic growth is welcome to listen. I have lots of non-widow listeners, so they're welcome to do that. And then, I have a free course that is really just designed to kind of course correct some of the most common myths and give people some valuable information so that they're not wasting so much time on inaccurate and outdated information.
Oh, I love that. Krista, what you're doing is so valuable, and I'm so glad that you're out there in the world. And I'm so glad I know about you now, because I feel like I'll send people your way, because I think grief is such a specific thing that people struggle with. And I think it's wonderful what you're doing to help women adjust to their new world and process all of this stuff that's really difficult,
Thank you. Yeah, I would never, I'm not grateful that he died so that I can have this opportunity, but I also really love this opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you joining me today, and look forward to staying in touch. And thank you so much.
Same. Thank you. Yes.
That's it for this week. If you've enjoyed our chat, I hope you'll help spread the word. Share this episode with friends, and head on over to wherever you listen to podcasts and leave me a review. And don't forget, for more great stepmom content, head on over to thiscustomlife.com and follow me on social media. Just search This Custom Life on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest. Until next time, you keep being you and know that we are in this together. See you here next week.